You didn't lose them suddenly. They were already gone in their mind long before they disappeared from your life. What unsettles you isn't just the silence, it's the precision of it. No warning, no visible buildup, no argument big enough to justify the disappearance. Just a clean cut, as if the connection never existed in the first place. And the part that lingers isn't confusion, it's the quiet realization that you were interacting with a version of them that was already halfway detached. There's a reason this keeps happening to certain people, and it's not what you think. It's not random. It's not just cold-hearted behavior. And more importantly, it's not always about you. But that doesn't mean you're not part of the system that allowed it. The behavior looks simple on the surface. Someone pulls away without explanation, stops responding, ends the connection with surgical detachment. But underneath that behavior is a highly organized internal mechanism driven by nervous system activation, attachment conditioning, and something called identity preservation bias. In plain terms, their system is designed to protect them from emotional threat, even if that means erasing people. This isn't impulsive, it's patterned. When someone cuts others off without warning, what you're seeing is the final stage of an avoidance reinforcement loop. Over time, their brain has learned that distancing equals safety. The moment emotional intensity rises, closeness, vulnerability, expectation, their threat perception circuitry activates. Not because you've done something objectively harmful, but because closeness itself feels like a loss of control. So they don't communicate. They exit. To you, it feels abrupt. To them, it feels necessary. This is where it gets more precise. According to attachment theory, particularly the work of John Bowlby, early relational experiences shape how individuals regulate closeness and distance. Someone with avoidant attachment conditioning doesn't process connection the same way you do. Where you see intimacy, they experience potential exposure. Where you feel bonding, they feel pressure. So they start detaching early, not physically at first, internally. They begin reducing emotional investment while still maintaining the appearance of connection. Conversations become slightly less engaged, responses lose depth. There's a subtle shift in presence. You don't notice it immediately because it's gradual, but internally, they're already preparing for exit. Like a diver slowly equalizing pressure before descending deeper, they adjust themselves to detach without emotional shock. And then one day, they're gone. This is the part no one warns you about. The cutoff isn't the beginning of the problem, it's the final execution of a decision that was made much earlier. Which raises the question you don't want to ask. Why didn't you feel it happening? Because in many cases, the people who get cut off are operating from their own unconscious patterns. There's often a complementary dynamic at play. While one person is avoiding closeness to protect themselves, the other is leaning in, sometimes ignoring subtle signs of withdrawal, sometimes overcompensating to maintain connection. This creates a silent imbalance. An imbalance over time triggers the exact mechanism that leads to disappearance. The avoidance system interprets increasing emotional demand as a threat, not necessarily because it's excessive, but because it activates unresolved trauma imprinting. Their nervous system isn't reacting to you in the present, it's reacting to a stored memory of what closeness once cost them. So they exit before the cost appears again. Here's the metaphor that makes this visible. Imagine their emotional system as a fire alarm that goes off not when there's fire, but when there's heat. Normal warmth, connection, attention, emotional depth gets misinterpreted as danger, and instead of checking the source, they evacuate the building entirely. You're left standing inside wondering why everything's shut down. This is where it becomes self-sabotage. Because while the behavior protects them in the short term, it reinforces the exact isolation they claim not to want. Each time they cut someone off, the brain registers relief. Relief becomes reward. Reward strengthens the loop, and the loop becomes identity. I'm just someone who doesn't need people. But that's not independence. That's conditioned avoidance. And here's the destabilizing truth. People who cut others off without warning often believe they're the emotionally stable ones. They see themselves as rational, controlled, unaffected. But what they're actually demonstrating is a low tolerance for emotional complexity. They don't lack feelings, they lack the capacity to stay when feelings intensify. So they leave before they're required to process anything. And if you're the one being cut off, there's a different kind of confrontation waiting for you. Because part of what makes this pattern repeat is your willingness to ignore early signals in favor of maintaining connection. You might tell yourself you're patient, understanding, not demanding, but underneath that is often a quiet fear of loss that keeps you invested even when the connection becomes one-sided. This is the identity disruption most people resist. You aren't just abandoned, you participated in a dynamic where emotional imbalance was normalized, and your system allowed it. Not because you're weak, but because your own attachment conditioning may prioritize connection over clarity. So you stay longer than you should, you invest deeper than they can meet, and when they finally disappear, it feels like betrayal. But part of what hurts is that you sensed something was off long before it happened. You just didn't act on it. This is where it turns, because at a certain point, the conversation shifts away from their behavior and to the pattern itself. People who cut others off without warning aren't just avoiding you, they're avoiding a version of themselves that only appears in close relationships, a version that feels exposed, dependent, or out of control. And rather than integrating that version, they eliminate the context that brings it out. They remove the mirror. But mirrors don't disappear, they just get replaced, which leads to the predictive outcome most people don't see. If this pattern remains unchanged, they will continue cycling through relationships that never reach depth. Initial connection, gradual discomfort, silent withdrawal, clean exit, repeat. From the outside, it looks like independence. From the inside, it's emotional stagnation. And for you, if your pattern remains unchanged, you will continue being drawn to people who cannot sustain the level of connection you're capable of. Not because that's what you want, but because it aligns with a familiar dynamic, one where you earn closeness rather than experience it freely. That's the hidden cost. Not just losing them, repeating them. So the original question resolves differently than expected. Why do people cut others off without warning? Because for them, warning would require confrontation, and confrontation would require emotional exposure, and exposure is exactly what their system is designed to avoid. So they choose silence, not as cruelty, as control. But understanding this doesn't make the experience less real, it makes it more precise. It removes the illusion that closure was something they were capable of giving you, because closure requires staying present in discomfort, and their entire system is built to escape it. So the absence of explanation isn't a mystery, it's a confirmation of how they regulate emotion, of how they preserve identity, of how they survive connection. And once you see it that way, something shifts. You stop asking why they didn't explain and start recognizing what their silence already explained. But there's one part that remains open, because now the pattern is visible, not just in them, but in the dynamic itself. And the question that follows is quieter, but more consequential. What kind of connections are you still choosing that feel familiar, but were never built to last? That answer doesn't arrive all at once, but once you start noticing it, you won't be able to unsee it. And that's where this conversation continues.